An Emergency. Taken from Llamas on the Loose by Jerry Massey. Illustrated by Dana Thompson, John Merck, and Linda Slattery. A visit from one of Dad's old friends, Doc Erickson, sends Penny and her brother Jack on an adventure. After Dad agrees to let Penny and Jack work on Doc Erickson's unusual farm, strange things begin to happen. Doc Erickson teaches Penny and Jack about the curious animals they raise and teaches them to work hard. Beware of wild animals, Doc Erickson warns. If the dinner gongs rings, the floodlights shine. Be prepared for an emergency. The Great Escape. Doc Erickson had to make our visit educational so he could qualify for a research grant, and during that week he taught us a lot about the history of llamas in the U.S. We also learned how to groom them and how to mix their feed. There were 40 llamas in all, 34 adults, and 6 cryas. There was one special male, Jock, who was the boss of the herd. He took charge of all the females, and every now and then had a spit fight with the 2 other yearling males to remind them who was the boss. Male llamas do have fangs to bite with, and if they get in a real fight, you'll see them leap up and come down on each other, biting, slashing with their hooves, trying to knock each other down, and spitting quarts at each other. But usually, the lead male only has to let loose a couple of pints of spit at the other males to let them know he's still in charge. Since female llamas don't have any upper teeth, their number one defense is to spit. And when a llama spits at you, you can consider yourself, in no uncertain terms, spit upon. They can reach right down into their stomachs to spit, unlike people who use only their throats. So in a sense, llamas are pretty well defended. They can sense intruders at a distance, and they will instinctively aim for an attacker's face to spit at, in order to blind him. On the other hand, if a llama senses an approaching attacker, but is trapped in a fenced pasture, he can get away, and a llama under attack by more than one creature is pretty helpless. 2 medium-sized dogs can pull down a full-grown llama. That was why Dr. Erickson had the whole place hog-wired. Supposedly, we also learned how to halter a llama, if you want to count it that way. What actually happened was that Jack got his arms round Tick-Tock's neck, and she bucked him all over the barnyard for about 10 minutes. Then, when she was exhausted and wanted a drink, I got the harness around her nose, and Jack fastened it before she could buck again. If we were taller and heavier, we could do it, Jack said. But I can hardly reach her nose unless she keeps her head down. Look, 2 of us ought to be smarter than one of her, I told him. Size has nothing to do with it. Even the trainer's manual says that. Well, I wish Tick-Tock would read the manual then. But at the challenge in my words, he came up to Tick-Tock again and got his arms around her neck to get her halter off. We were in the barnyard. Tick-Tock had been nibbling up some spilled grain. She took one look at Jack and started jumping again, taking him with her. His legs swung up one way and then the other as she jumped and turned and bucked. "All I want to do is get your halter off," he yelled. "She must think it's a game," I called as I chased them around, trying to get a way to jump in and grab her round the neck on the other side. "Sure it's a game. Kill the kid!" Jack yelled. "Would you do something?" But Tick-Tock turned away and jumped. I saw Jack's legs swing out past her. He tried to get his footing to brace himself. "Penny!" he called. I shut my eyes and jumped in. Tick-Tock snorted indignantly, as though she thought I was cheating. "Quick! The buckle's on your side," I said. A second later, the halter came off. Tick-Tock stopped and stood stock still. "She does think it's a game," Jack exclaimed. We let the tired llama go back to the pasture. "Boy," Jack said, "I'm glad Doc gets the grant just for teaching us, because if it depended on how much we learned, I'm not sure he'd get enough to cover postage." Of course, along with the fun stuff, we also learned to pick up rocks in the pasture, scrape paint on the outside of the bunkhouse, and weed the garden in front of the house. In fact, most of what we did was just plain old work, but it was nice to have Jack there to talk to. On our second Saturday, we hurried to get the chores done early so that we could leave for home right after lunch. "Now, you two be sure to bring Scruggs with you next Friday," Mrs. Erickson said as we sat down to eat. "We certainly can use him." "Sure," Jack exclaimed. I only nodded. "And your sister Jean, too," Doc Erickson added. Jack hesitated, looking glum, and I said, "She's not back from Alabama yet." "Maybe next time then," Mrs. Erickson said. "Be nice to have 2 boys and 2 girls, because nobody gets picked on and nobody gets left out." Well, it was obvious that she didn't know Jean. Jean was just born with the tendency to get picked on and left out. I sighed heavily. "You two eat up," Doc Erickson told us as he stood up. "I want to get the cries out of the nursery before we leave for Peabody. The yearling males are too rough with them." We nodded, and he went out. A minute later, the dinner gong that hung on the porch started banging furiously. Jack and I looked at each other, and we both said, "Trouble!" at the same time before we rushed out. Mrs. Erickson followed. "Look! Look!" Dr. Erickson cried as we all came bursting out the door. We looked. Everything was silent. A faint breeze kicked up dust in pasture 1. "Everything seems quiet," Jack said. "Seems quiet?" Dr. Erickson exclaimed. "The llamas are gone! Gone!" We ran down the steps. "The gate's open," I said, and pointed out the wide pasture gate. Mrs. Erickson squinted and said, "The gate to pasture 2 is open, too." Dr. Erickson ran back into the house and came out with his field glasses. He used them to sweep over the pastures. "All the gates are open. Quick! Get in the truck!" We scrambled for the pickup. Jack and I hopped into the truck bed, and the Ericksons got into the front. With a mighty jerk of the gears, we took off. Tick-Tock on the loose. Pasture 1 had the gate most often used as an exit gate. By that I mean that Pasture 4's gate led into the pasture alongside it, Pasture 3's gate led into Pasture 2, and Pasture 2's gate led into Pasture 1. But Pasture 1 had a gate that opened into the barnyard, and the barnyard gate opened to the dirt road. There was an exit gate on the far side of Pasture 4, but we never used it much because it was so far from the barns, and I'm not sure the llamas even know it was there. We jolted down that dirt road, headed for the causeway. A welcome sight met us as we came down the bank. The llamas stood on either side of the causeway, knee-deep in the shallow lake water. Most of them ignored us. They were busy drinking or browsing at some of the plants on the banks, or lifting their muzzles to catch the smells. The 2 yearling males were having a spit fight. Mrs. Erickson hopped out of the cab, and Jack jumped out of the back. I started to follow, but Dr. Erickson yelled, "I'll get the sheriff!" and took off again before I could get out. Jack and Mrs. Erickson nodded and waved. I don't think Doc Erickson knew I was still in the truck until we pulled into town. But he was so flustered at the llamas having been let out that he simply parked and said, "I'll get the sheriff!" And he rushed up the sidewalk. I felt kind of blank myself. I hopped out of the truck and looked around. Winnetka certainly wasn't a big or busy town. Right across the street was a big warehouse-type building that said Ernie's Everything Outlet on it. Instead of regular doors, like any other store, it had huge garage doors that opened onto the street. The effect was that the whole front of the store seemed to be open for the public to walk in and out. But at the moment, nobody was walking out of Ernie's Everything Outlet. Instead, a huge crowd seemed to be pushing to get in. Somebody was yelling, "Stay back, folks! It may bite!" That was why the crowd couldn't get in. I walked across the street in time to hear someone say, "Looks like a Shetland pony to me." I started to get a sinking feeling. I pushed through the crowd to where the store manager was, keeping everyone back. The inside of the store was vast and cluttered. A pile of baskets lay here, a bundle of blankets there. Crates and cartons had been stacked to make aisles, and there was a candy center. There were crates of boxed candy, all stacked together, and several open bins of penny candy under a sign that said, "Take your pick, penny candy, only $1 a pound." And there, with her muzzle buried in the black licorice bits, was Tick-Tock. She lifted her head and looked over at me. I'm not sure that Tick-Tock actually ate any of the licorice, but I think the pungent smell must have fascinated her. She put her muzzle back into the bin. "Mister," I said, "I know that llama." "Is it yours?" the manager asked me. "Well, no, but I'm a friend of the family, you might say." "Can you get it out of here?" he asked. "If you got a rope," I told him. "This is a store," he exclaimed. "What would we do with a rope?" "The sign says it's an everything store." "Everything but rope," he told me. "How about a dog leash?" I asked. 99 cents, and it's yours." "I don't have 99 cents, I told him. "I only want to borrow it." He went and found a dog leash. I tied a knot on it, about a third of the way from the end, and walked up to Tick-Tock. "That kid must be from the circus," someone guessed. "She knows how to handle a baby giraffe." "Tick-Tock," I said, holding the leash behind my back. "Tick-Tock." The llama looked up at me. There were black smudges on her nose. The manager crowded up behind me. "A whole bin of candy ruined," he exclaimed. "Ruined by a baby giraffe." Tick-Tock put her banana ears back and raised her muzzle, eyeing him sideways. "Stop," I said to him in a soft but urgent voice. "You're scaring her." And I halted where I was. He bumped into me. "Scaring her?" he exclaimed. "She's eating my candy." "Don't," I said, as her eyes widened. "Oh, no." I covered my face with my hands and ducked. Tick-Tock missed me when she spit, but I'm afraid she got the manager. He yelled, and she wheeled and raced up one of the aisles. "Rabies! It's got rabies!" he yelled. I ran after her. She wasn't in sports shoes or baby clothes. I decided to look at the food aisles and I soon found them. A scream from the back of the store led me to her. The wholesale flowers were back there. One lady, a customer, rushed past me, but when I got there, I saw the florist lady nervously holding up a bouquet to Tick-Tock. The llama gently sniffed along the tops of the carnations and took a nibble of baby's breath. "She won't hurt you," I said. Tick-Tock glanced at me and went back to browsing. "Tick-Tock," I said, and put my free hand out to her. She really wanted me to leave her alone, but as long as she had the flowers, she decided not to resist. I slipped my arm around her neck. While I talked to her, I got the dog leash onto her neck and fastened it above the knot I had tied in it. That way the lead couldn't get too tight and choke her. "Phew," I said. "Is she yours?" the florist lady asked me. "No, I'm just her maid." And I laughed a little. Just then Doc Erickson and the sheriff, and the store manager, who was mopping his face, came up the aisle. Doc Erickson was so glad that Tick-Tock was okay, that he didn't mind how much the store manager had to say to him. He paid for the licorice and the flowers. I took the bouquet, and with that and the lead, I got the llama to come with me. Tick-Tock was as mild as milk once we got her out of the store. She gladly hopped into the pickup on command. I followed her.